Hello again. Today is Monday, October the 19th, and hopefully at some point in time you've taken time to look at, first of all, that statue of Louis XV, which you need to know what art style it is. And no, it is not Renaissance. No, it is not Northern Renaissance. No, it is not Baroque. It is a different style of art we have not explored yet. We'll talk about that later. But, it's one of those things you have to learn. So, pardon me. Now let's begin talking about, as it says there, how the strong monarchy that was first established by Louis XIV under Louis XV begins to fade because, you see, Louis XIV's monarchy worked for Louis XIV because Louis XIV was Louis XIV. Louis XV is not Louis XIV. Louis XIV, once again, was an effective king. Not a good king. He was an effective king. Meaning, once again, Louis XIV did what Louis XIV set out to do. Louis XV, probably because, unlike his father, he spent most of his life a bumbling fool, hanging out at the court of Versailles, lap of luxury. You know, he didn't have to work. He did not train. Louis XVI, who will follow him, gives the word bumbling fool new meaning, but that's another story. Let's go on, shall we, with Louis XV. Okay, Louis XV. So France after Louis XIV was, of course, still a power to be reckoned with in Europe because it still had Europe's largest population, had access to Europe's largest amount of riches, tax base. The king could get to the tax base like that, which the British had difficulty with. So, as it says there, Louis XIV's 5-year-old nephew, sorry, not the son, but Louis XIV's 5-year-old nephew, who would become Louis XV, succeeded Louis XIV, but his regent, he's 5 years old, his regent is the Duke of Orleans. Now, under the Duke of Orleans, who's running things for Louis XV, emerges one of the great financial scandals of the French monarchy. And this was the Mississippi bubble. Here's the problem. Louis XV's government, or rather the Duke of Orleans, ruling for Louis XV, the government needed money, needed ways to turn money. And as you saw in the film, hopefully, John Law, this Scottish mathematician, whiz kid, gambler, economist, came up with paper money. Before in France, all money was gold. And you say, well, why don't we use gold today? Well, the problem with gold, it has value, and the value doesn't fluctuate that much. But the problem with gold is the simple fact there's not that much of it. And since there's not that much of it, that means that not lots of people can possess much of it. And so it creates a currency shortage, and it means that prices stay depressed, wages stay depressed. There's all sorts of problems with it. And also, even the government doesn't have enough gold. And so this guy suggests paper money. And he also suggests to the king that they could make money by, he creates this investment company in the colony of Louisiana. He advertised the colony of Louisiana as some kind of a paradise where if you go, you'll eventually be turned into a millionaire. And lots of people bought stock in it, and that stock continued to rise and rise and rise. Other people used that stock and sold it to John Law's new French National Bank. The bank gave them paper currency. And then, just like we saw in the story about the Netherlands, the tulips, there was over speculation. Yeah, over speculation, meaning that people thought that the price of these stocks would keep going up and up and up. And one day, somebody walked in with a whole basket full of these paper stocks, paper currency, and demanded gold. He walked in with a stack full of paper currency. He walked out literally with wagons full of gold. And the Treasury, the National Bank, became bankrupt. So the bank did not have the gold to cover its currency. All gold payments were halted in France, which is, one of the things. You see, now I know what you're asking, Mr. Fuller. I'm sorry, Mr. Oh, here I am. I'm stuck. Mr. Minch. I know what you're asking, Mr. Minch. You're saying, Mr. Horton, what is our currency based on today? These green pieces of paper that are in our pockets today, why do they have value? Because they're just green pieces of paper. Well, you see, this country originally was based on the gold standard, originally, until about the latter part of the 19th century, when the country shifted over to not a silver standard, but a dual metal standard, a standard which included gold and silver, because once again, there was more silver. But in the 20th century, that, of course, was unworkable because you just need lots of currency. You need lots of currency in the United States of America to do business. And there's just not that much gold and not that much silver, actually. And so, that's when they shifted over to solely a paper currency. And today, your paper currency is based upon this phrase: full faith and credit in the government of the United States, in the belief that the government of the United States will pay its debts, which is a staggering prospect right now. The United States government is in debt somewhere to the tune of $29 trillion. $29 trillion. Say, Mr. Horton, what's $1 trillion? Can I make $1 trillion? Well, who knows? With inflation, you might be able to. Well, what's $1 trillion? $1 trillion is like this. $1 trillion would be if Miss Hall took a $1,000 bill and Miss Hall laid it on the ground and began to stack $1,000 bills on top of it. $1 trillion would be if that stack reached 51 miles into the sky. Yeah. $1 trillion would be like if you were born when Jesus was. Excuse me. You were born when Jesus was, and you were given the right to spend $1 million a minute. You would still have money today. That's $1 trillion. So, and we own $29 trillion as a government, but that's all right. But you still, American dollars are some of the most widely accepted currency in the whole continent, all the planet. In fact, some smaller countries, only use American currency as their currency. So, but anyway, getting back to France, the bank did not have the gold to back its currency, and the government of France just didn't pay their debt. They simply said, we don't have the money, we're not paying it. Except to the very rich. But still, when a country gets in the habit of not paying its debt, then trust me, there will be chaos. John Law, the gambler who came up with all these brilliant ideas to make money, fled the country. The Mississippi bubble, as it was called, had burst. The Duke of Orleans, the regent of the French king, in order to keep the support of the nobility, began to give more and more power and position the nobility to keep their support. And the nobility, though, because they were just like the Louis XV, they'd been laying around the Palace of Versailles like a bunch of losers. They had never been trained in the actual work of government and really didn't want to do this job as of government. And so the ability of the French government to be efficient, to do the right thing, to govern a country, to be successful, to exert power, um, was going down the tubes rapidly after Louis XV. I'm sorry, after Louis XIV. Fact of the matter, Louis XV, when he does become a king, he sees how bad everything is. And Louis XV says, you know what? Things are going to last as long as I'm alive. But after me, and that's something for a king to say, after me, he said, after me, the deluge, meaning the flood. So, the local French parliaments, local French councils were the most effective way to control the French monarch. These parliaments could not legislate, but they could only approve or refuse to approve the acts of the monarchy. In 1726, Cardinal Fleury will become the chief magistrate of the French court and a chief advisor to Louis XV. He was, and I've seen this on a test somewhere, the last of the church officials, the last of the clerics who will influence French policy. He, Louis XV, recognized the bad condition of the royal treasury. He repudiated, I like big words and I cannot lie, repudiated part of the national debt. The French government owed money to people. He repudiated part of it. You say, what does the word repudiate mean? Well, he basically said, we don't owe that money anymore. That's what it means. He repudiated debt. That is not a promising forecast for a government. For a government to say, sorry, we're not going to pay the debt. For the record, the United States government, when it formed in 1783, the United States government paid its debts to the people who had loaned it money. And you shouldn't be so surprised or so proud that the United States government did that, because most of the people the United States government owed money to were the founding fathers themselves, lots of them, or friends of the founding fathers. And so, yeah. So, new industries in France were formed, but the state of France was never put on a firm financial footing under Louis XV, and especially not Louis XVI. Because Louis XV is bad, Louis XVI is a bumbling fool. Fleury died in 1743 and failed to keep France from intervening in a war between Prussia and Austria. I mean, France gets involved in the War of Austrian Succession, and which gets France exactly nothing, except a lot of dead soldiers and a lot of money spent. The French will make a habit of that. Yeah, I mean, the French will spend somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million gold livres in financing the American Revolution. That was enough. The amount of money that the French loaned the colonies and never got paid back, by the way. The amount of money that the French loaned the American colonies in the American Revolution was enough to house and feed every peasant in France for a year. But anyway, I'm gonna have to end up. He had not trained Louis XV to be an effective monarch. Louis wanted absolute power, but unlike Louis XIV, would not work for it. His personal life was scandalous, as it says there. He was not an evil king, but he was a bad king. I mean, he didn't want to be bad, but he's bad. France then suffered not from the inability or lack of resources, but from lack of leadership. And that's where we're going to end today. Today is my anniversary, so I'm going home. Bye now.